If you would like to become a wedding filmmaker or enhance your knowledge, I think this interview might be interesting for you.
This is a Cinity Gear News video.
Hi, I'm Johnny from Cinity, and today I'm here with Martin from the Czech Republic. Martin, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
You are a cinematographer, but a wedding cinematographer. But before we dive into hearing more about your type of work and how you do and what you do, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I wouldn't call myself a cinematographer, probably. I think I'm still just documenting things. I'm not like creating something. It's just what I see, I like to document it. And something about me is that I really like to travel, and that's why I do weddings. Because I really like to travel, I like to know new things, and it's one of the things that actually brought me to the business, because I hated sitting in the office and I really wanted to travel and know new cultures.
So you did weddings from the beginning when you started your filming career?
Yes, I studied computer science, and then I worked in the big corporation, and I didn't really enjoy, sitting in the office and doing the same stuff every day. When I started to, what would be something else that I could do, actually weddings were the first thing I thought about. So I started doing weddings. Actually, it's much more creative to do weddings than, for instance, advertising. Because with weddings, I can do whatever I want. And usually the client is really happy. And also I can travel, I can know new things. And with commercials, it's much more complicated because you have the script and you have to just, follow the script, and then you just deliver a video and that's it.
Let me be a little bit ruthless here. And before we dive into, the equipment and how you do stuff, in the hierarchy of filmmaking, wedding filmmakers sometimes don't really consider to be on top. And I'm saying this with a great sorrow because the responsibility is really amazing. How do you deal with this? Or maybe you don't really care about it.
Yeah, I can completely understand. But, I have to tell you that some of my colleagues, they do wedding films and it's everything just posing or everything is staged and there is no real memory behind, the wedding film. And this is probably why I think most of the other cinematographers, when they look at the wedding film, they think, this is not a real cinematography. And of course it's not, but I think it can be a real documentary. Actually, sometimes a really good one with high-end look and high-end style. You can have a really bad wedding video and really, really good. So it really depends. But I can understand why a lot of videographers think.
Let me please understand, how much influence do you have on how the day is folding? Or you're really trying to be kind of away and just document the stuff?
Yes, of course. I think you can have two main approaches. One is that you are just observer, and the second is that you are actually participant. You are participating in the actual event. And of course, you're never going to be just observer because you're going to be really close to the couple and to the family. So they're going to be aware of you being there. Even as a participant, you can be a good participant and you can be a really bad. You can really influence the day, make people more relaxed. You can have a good influence on the day. Maybe, if someone is really nervous, then I'm trying to, talk to them. And sometimes I even put my camera down and I just really like to talk to the people because, everything I'm trying to capture, there needs to be something real behind. You can have so many wedding films and they can be beautiful. For a stranger, they wouldn't even be able to tell that, everything has been staged. But for my clients, if they will see a perfect shot, let's say, but if they can tell that, we had to redone this shot 5 or 7 times. It's not what a wedding film should be about, I think. Sometimes it's more complicated because if it's an elopement, maybe let's say 2 people, then, it's completely impossible for me to be just observer. So then I'm maybe like, we're trying to have a great time together and I'm just trying to capture it. I'm just telling the story about them exploring the nature, for instance. Then I'm trying to be, just the guy with the camera there. And sometimes the guest, they can think about me as a maybe guest with a camera. So that's the approach.
And do you work by yourself or you have a team? I mean, it's more like approach of one camera, one perspective, or you have multiple cameras with you?
Yeah, of course. I I started as a single videographer, but then, once the wedding started to be bigger and bigger, I had to find someone to work with me and then someone to help me. So now we're a team of 3 to 4 people. Usually it's just 2 of us shooting, and then I have assistants for editing and so. Because I think, with bigger and bigger weddings, the responsibility is also bigger and bigger. So I think it's responsible to have someone. For instance, if something really, really bad will happen, then I know that I have someone with the same skills and same style who can substitute me in case of something really bad will happen, maybe.
Martin, one thing that I'm sure many people will be interested to know is how do you get your clients?
Yeah, it's always a word of reference because I don't really like to marketize myself, because then I know I'm attracting a client that are maybe not my ideal clients. So I really liked, if someone will get in touch, I know that they are really interested in my services. And so far it just works.
At the beginning, did you used to do some work for free or for very little money just in order to build this type of, let's call it, wedding library that you can present to others?
Of course, and my first films were as well just films for my friends and maybe some friends of my friends. But then I think always when I gave a discount to some couple, there was some problems. So it's not a great approach how to build your portfolio. Of course, if it's a friend of yours or if the couple is really interesting, yeah, you should give them a discount. But other than that, I would recommend, just try to do your best, but don't work on discounts, because discounts will only bring you another, couple that will ask you for a discount.
Interesting philosophy. When you talk about big weddings, what is more or less the budget for those weddings?
Actually, it really depends. Basically, most of the things that can change is probably the region, most like, because if someone is from, let's say, America, the wedding is really big and sometimes it can last even for 2 days. So you have a rehearsal dinner, then it's the actual wedding. So we're talking about roughly 5,000 to 10,000 US dollars. And also really big weddings are in the Middle East. So also it then depends, like the wedding film itself can be really long, and then the editing is really expensive part of the wedding film.
Okay, and expenses like traveling cost of 2 to 3, 4 people is already inclusive, or this is on top of the expenses?
Yeah, it's already included. I really like to keep things really simple, so I always send like the final amount to my clients, and they know what they're paying.
Okay, and when it comes to equipment, what is your preferred equipment right now?
I really like to be shooting with small cameras, because if you're traveling, it already happened to me that your checked bag won't arrive. It will either get lost or they will load it to different plane or something. So I really need to have all of my, most important equipment packed with me in my carry-on, and I always take it on board. So having a big camera, this is not an option. So it's always a really small camera. And then the most important thing for me is the image itself that's producing the camera. It's not about autofocus, and it's not about auto exposure and the filters. So I think the only thing that my clients will, see is the color. And that's it. So, yeah.
So currently you are working with Blackmagic cameras, or you changed to something else?
Yeah, right now I'm working with Sigma FP. It's a really small camera. It's weather sealed, and the amount of data it produces is insane. But at the same time, the picture quality is really, really nice.
Let me get it right. You're actually filming weddings in Cinema DNG RAW.
Yes, correct. Because I think you can have a really, really easy to operate camera that's on one hand, and on the other hand, you can have a camera that's small, it's reliable, whatever, but doesn't have autofocus, doesn't have ND filters, but the picture quality is really nice. And my clients are going to see the picture quality, not if the camera was easy to use during the day.
So you're not using autofocus at all? That means you're using only manual lenses?
Actually, I prefer using standard photo for the lenses, and actually like the really cheap one, because for me the difference in the quality of a small lens and like let's say a high budget cinema lens, it's not going to be that much in the wedding films. And what I really like about small lenses is that I don't have to be worried about getting them in rain, or because I can have, for instance, two cheap lenses, and if I will break one, then I can, just take another one, and they're also really light.
Yeah, sorry, nobody's using cheap equipment. We are using modestly priced lenses here.
Yeah, but compared to what you would expect, these lenses are quite cheap.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the limitations with the Sigma FP, it doesn't have IBIS. How do you compensate on, because I guess you're working a lot handheld or more tripod, then of course that's not an issue, but how do you do this?
Most of the time I'm shooting just handheld because, I also learned that when I'm just holding the camera, I can be on a lot of places and I don't have to adjust the tripod or, move my equipment. And at the same time, I'm actually using the loop, the viewfinder. You just stick it to the display, and you have another point of contact with your body. That's what really helps me to stabilize my footage. And I like to use stabilized lenses also. And I also learned that, if shooting is too easy for you, then actually it's limiting you because you're not doing the creative decisions you should be doing. So that's why I don't want even like the easiest camera to operate, because then I will I will start to be lazy, and also you could tell from my wedding films then.
By the way, the Sigma FP can also is now offering external recorder to Blackmagic RAW and also a ProRes RAW. Did you try to work like this instead of DNG, Cinema DNG RAW?
Yes, I've tried working with BRAF before on the Blackmagic cameras, and now I also have Shogun. Oh, it's Ninja V. And I've tried working with ProRes, but actually I really like working with Cinema DNG because, the files are huge, but for the post-production, it's much more faster for me. The only problem is that you need to solve a storage, so you need to have a big server full of drive. And actually, when you're working on a wedding, you're going to do a lot of mistakes, wrong exposure, wrong white balance, or the lighting is going to be mixed, different set of lights. And if you want your skin tones to be right, then either you can spend a lot of time, for instance, fixing S-Log from Sony cameras, or with Cinema DNG. For me, it's really fast. So I ended up using Cinema DNG and as my preferred codec for shooting.
Interesting, always interesting to learn something new and hear how other professionals are working, of course. And when it comes to sound, I guess everything is an external sound.
Yeah, of course. And the problem with audio on wedding is that you cannot have someone to monitor the audio. So that's why I'm using a lot of different sources. I really try to hide microphone everywhere I could in case one will not be good enough or one will fail. I know that I have different microphones placed everywhere. Sometimes it's even okay to use the scratch audio from the camera with maybe a Rode microphone on the camera, but in most cases it's better to have a lav mic or try to record something from the DJ or if there is a sound engineer.
Interesting. And when it comes to external light, are you using some additional lights or you just, everything as is?
Yeah, it's always as is because it's the most beautiful light you can have. And, if the lighting is not perfect, then, it's the wedding. So I really like to keep it as it was.
Okay, and let's quickly jump into post-production. You already said that you're editing the Cinema DNG raw material. What is your preferred editing platform and how do you color correct stuff?
Yeah, we have switched to DaVinci Resolve maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago. They have an option to work in collaboration. So you have one server and then a lot of clients can edit the same project, for instance. So I have my assistant editor will start on the editing. And while he is still editing some parts, I can already start working maybe on color grading or some post-production in the first part that we've already said that is finished. So yeah, everything is done in DaVinci Resolve. It's editing and also the color grading.
And for the color grading, are you using external LUTs or LUTs that you created, or you simply really grade each shot?
Yeah, I'm always trying to have a different look for each wedding. And also, you know, with time, I realized that, you know, in the very beginning, I was using some heavy color grading. But right now, I'm trying to do my color grading in a way that, you know, I really like to keep things really simple. And I also think that this is something, you know, a lot. Something that's trendy now, it can age with time, and it will. So that's why I'm trying to keep things very simple. I just want my skin tones to be right, and I just want my exposures to be right. But other than that, I don't really like to be changing colors too much.
Okay. Two more things that I think it's quite important to hear from you. One, this is a bit of a strange time right now, and things obviously are changing since lockdowns and so on. How do you cooperate, or how do you manage during the tough time? Is there still sufficient work, or everything, or you had to kind of find different ways to do stuff?
You know, the problem with weddings, especially those higher budget weddings, is that you have a lot of guests from different parts of the world that they will get together for this event or gathering. And this is something that in these times, it would be too risky. So yeah, a lot of my weddings planned for 2020 has been rescheduled for 2021. But at the same time, you know, it's been strange because, for instance, commercials, you need much more commercials during these times because we're locked in our houses and we're just watching TV and Netflix. So you have to produce a lot of commercials and series and stuff, and a lot of staff, cameramen or, you know, assistants that has been traveling to my country to shoot commercials or series are not able to get here right now. So that's what I'm doing right now. That I took an opportunity and I started to work on bigger sets again until we will be able to start traveling again.
Unless somebody will invent some creative Zoom wedding filming cinematography, who knows? Anyway, you have a lot of experience in your field, and obviously you decided to put it all together and do some sort of masterclass. Just tell me a little bit about your masterclass series of videos or membership, or how do you manage this?
Yeah, so when the pandemic started in spring, I had this idea because in the past I've got a lot of questions about, you know, my style and my equipment and, you know, how I got to what I'm doing these days. And I thought that, you know, the pandemic, it's a great opportunity for me to do something that I normally wouldn't have time to do. So I started shooting this masterclass. I thought that, you know, shooting few lessons will take maybe 2 or 3 weeks at its maximum. It actually ended up being almost half a year of project and shooting until the very, very late night. But I've got the really nice feedback from the users, because you can have a lot of tutorials for, you know, these technical tutorials on YouTube, but there's not so many lessons that will tell you, you know, what should you do and if you want to start doing these higher budget weddings, because I think it's much more about your mindset and it's not so much about the cameras and equipment and editing. It's really about what you are doing and how you are thinking during the day.
Good. Martin, thank you very much for your time. It was really a pleasure to talk to you, and as always, learn something new. My favorite wedding style is actually Indian wedding. I shot one, I think it was 1.5 or 2 years ago, again for friends, and that was one of my little dreams, yeah, to do an Indian wedding, and I really enjoyed. I don't know if you ever filmed one of those. If you didn't, try. It's very interesting. Good. Guys, thank you very much for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.